They said the patients in Ward C were finally improving. The violent outbursts had stopped, the screaming had faded, and for the first time in years, the halls of Mercy Hills Psychiatric Center had grown quiet. But what the doctors didn't understand was that the silence wasn't a sign of healing. It was a warning. Because one by one, the patients began to die, and every single body was found the same way, sitting upright, eyes stretched wide in terror, mouths frozen open as if they had died trying to scream. Yet no sound had ever been heard. Mercy Hills Psychiatric Center had never shut its doors, and that's exactly what made it so unsettling. Unlike the abandoned asylums people whisper about online, this place was still fully operational, still admitting patients, still housing dozens of individuals whose minds had fractured in ways no one could fully explain. Families still walked through its front entrance every day, holding onto hope that the doctors inside could somehow bring their loved ones back. But there was one section of the building that staff avoided talking about, and that was Ward C, a secured wing reserved for patients whose conditions went beyond diagnosis and into something far more disturbing. These were not just people suffering from mental illness. These were patients who insisted they were being watched, who spoke to empty corners of their rooms, and who reacted to unseen presences as if something stood right in front of them. Lena Carter had only been working the night shift for a few days, but it didn't take long for her to realize that something about Ward C felt deeply wrong. Psychiatric wards were never supposed to be silent, yet every night she walked those halls, it felt like the entire wing was holding its breath. There were no distant voices, no restless pacing, no sudden outbursts echoing through the corridors, just an unnatural stillness that made even the hum of the fluorescent lights feel too loud. Then, on her third night, she found her first body. The patient was sitting upright in bed, completely still, his eyes wide open and locked onto something that wasn't there anymore. His mouth was stretched in a silent expression of horror so intense that Lena felt a chill crawl down her spine the moment she stepped into the room. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of pain, no medical explanation that made any sense. There was just the overwhelming feeling that whatever he had seen in his final moments had terrified him beyond comprehension. Lena wasn't authorized to access the security recordings, but the unease growing inside her was stronger than the rules. She waited until the early hours of the morning and pulled up the footage from the exact time the patient had died. At first, everything looked normal. The patient was lying in bed. The room appeared empty. But then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the screen flickered with a brief burst of static, distorting the image just enough to make her lean closer. When the picture cleared, something had changed. In the far corner of the room, where there had been nothing before, a shape now stood tall, unnaturally still, and so dark that it seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. Her breath caught as she replayed the footage again and again, her heart pounding harder each time she realized the same terrifying detail. The figure never entered the room. It had always been there. There was only one patient in Ward C who hadn't succumbed to whatever was happening. A woman named Iris who had been completely unresponsive for weeks. Her body present, but her mind seemingly unreachable. But when Lena, desperate for answers, mentioned the deaths within earshot, something shifted. Iris blinked out slowly, deliberately, and for the first time since Lena had seen her, she spoke in a voice so quiet it barely felt real. She said, "It comes when you notice it." A cold wave of dread washed over Lena as she stood frozen beside the bed, trying to process what that meant. But before she could respond, Iris's eyes moved, sliding past Lena's shoulder as if she were looking at something. Standing directly behind her, "Don't turn around," Iris whispered. But fear doesn't listen. The moment Lena began to turn, she felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, but a presence so heavy and suffocating that it seemed to press in from all sides, as if the air itself had thickened around her. Her heart pounded violently in her chest as a single, horrifying realization took hold in her mind. This thing wasn't hunting people. It wasn't chasing them. It was waiting for awareness, waiting for that precise moment when a person realizes they are no longer alone. Because once that realization happens, once your mind locks onto its presence, it locks onto you. The next morning, Lena Carter never reported for her shift. When staff finally went looking for her, they found her in one of the patient rooms, sitting upright on the bed with the exact same expression as the others. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her mouth was frozen in a silent scream that no one had heard. When they reviewed the security footage, they saw the now familiar glitch at exactly 2:13 a.m. But this time, as they slowed the footage down frame by frame, what they saw made it worse. The figure was closer, standing directly behind her, as if it had learned. And now, the patients in Ward C have grown quiet again. Not because they're healing, but because they have all begun to notice the same thing, something that stands in the corner of their rooms every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., watching them in silence and waiting patiently for the moment they finally look. So if you were in that room, knowing what was waiting in the corner, would you look? Or would you pretend it isn't there? Let me know in the comments. And if you're ready for more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one that follows you into the night. They said the patients in Ward C were finally getting better. For the first time in years, the halls of Mercy Hills Psychiatric Center had grown quiet. The violent outbursts had stopped, the screaming had faded, and a strange sense of calm settled over the facility. The doctor saw it as a breakthrough, a sign of healing. But they were wrong. The silence wasn't a cure. It was a warning. It started with a single patient, then another, and another. One by one, the residents of Ward C began to die, and the way they were found sent a chill down the spine of even the most seasoned staff. Every single body was discovered in the exact same position, sitting upright in their beds, eyes stretched wide in absolute terror. Their mouths were frozen open, as if they had died in the middle of a scream. But that was the impossible part. No one heard a thing. Not a whimper, not a cry for help. Not a single sound escaped their lips or the locked doors of their rooms. The silence that the doctors had celebrated was now the most terrifying sound in the entire hospital. What could possibly stalk the halls of a psychiatric ward, kill its patients with pure fear, and do it without making a single noise? The staff started looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows. They knew something was deeply wrong. It wasn't about mental illness anymore. Something else was in Ward C, something ancient and hungry, that fed on fear and silenced its victims forever. The question wasn't who would be next, but how they could possibly stop an enemy they couldn't see, hear, or even begin to understand. They were trapped in a symphony of silence, and the final note was drawing closer. If you enjoy stories that get under your skin, be sure to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.